Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I wanted to cover today carbohydrates and the glycemic index. Now this is something that I've talked about many times before, and my other videos do cover this, but I wanted to specifically address a paper that I found in the nutritional literature, and I will put that link to that paper for those people that are interested in the comments box below this video. It was in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and the researchers were interested in the effects of high glycemic index carbohydrates in post-exercise nutrition, and in particular they wanted to have a look at the appetite regulatory effects. Now this study was done in type 1 diabetics, so it has to be taken in that context when you look at the results, and therefore it's not exactly clear if this would have the same effect in healthy people. However, I found, reading through it, I thought it was interesting. It's worth a quick look if you want to have a look into this kind of subject. The subjects exercised, and then they were given either a high glycemic or low glycemic index meal, and then the researchers measured their blood glucose response, and they measured their appetite sensations after they'd had their meal. Now what they did is they tried to control the insulin response from the meals, so they matched the meals in a way that the meals provided the same amount of insulin release, but they provided different glycemic indices to the carbohydrates. What they found when they measured the blood glucose of the subjects after they'd had either a high or low glycemic index meal following exercise is they found that those people, unsurprisingly, who had had the high glycemic index meal had a greater area under the curve for blood glucose, which means that their blood glucose levels increased to a higher level for longer, and that provided the blood with more glucose for longer. Now that would be expected. What was actually interesting about the results was what they found is that there was a 25% reduction in appetite in those people who had the higher glucose response, in other words those people that consumed the high glycemic index meal, and they also found there was a 9% reduction in hunger sensations. So what this paper was effectively saying, and although I will say again it was done in type 1 diabetic patients, so it might not be completely applicable to healthy people, what it's effectively saying is if you eat high carbohydrate foods after you've had a workout, irrespective of the insulin release that they cause, higher glycemic index carbohydrates compared to their lower glycemic index carbohydrate cousins, they seem to provide a better appetite regulatory response in terms of the fact they cut off the appetite. And that would make sense because some of the appetite that you get, some of the hunger that you get after exercise is your body craving carbohydrates because you've depleted your glycogen stores. Anyone that's been out and done intensive exercise for a long duration will know how hungry you can get in the evening after you've performed that exercise. Your body really is craving foods, and particularly you do crave carbohydrate foods. You go straight to the carbohydrate type foods, and it's a very strong sensation. It's very difficult to suppress. Eating high glycemic index carbohydrates after your exercise may actually cut off some of that appetite effect that you feel later, because all you're doing is you're repleting your glycogen at a faster rate. The body's going to increase its appetite after exercise if you've depleted your glycogen, and it's going to get its carbohydrates one way or the other, and it will, through the central nervous system, through the brain, change your behavior so that you go and eat those carbohydrates. And this is one of the reasons that I've always said that exercise is a double-edged sword if you're trying to lose body weight. The current paradigm suggests that if you go out and if you exercise and if you cause a negative calorie balance because you're exercising more, you will lose weight. I've always argued that's not true, because if you exercise more, your appetite gets stimulated following exercise to a higher degree, and you can actually increase the amount of energy that you put into your body. Now that's not to say that the exercise won't cause weight loss, because I don't believe that this calorie balance paradigm is what actually causes weight gain and weight loss. There are other ways that are more supported by evidence in the literature that suggest what weight gain, particularly body fat is what I'm talking about, what weight gain is actually caused by. But if you exercise more Anecdotally, I think most people would agree that when you exercise very intensely for long durations, you eat much more food following your exercise, and generally your calorie intake goes up. So it's very difficult to actually cause a negative energy balance by exercising. What you actually tend to find is you get a positive energy balance, and your body actually starts to become more anabolic, and you start to create tissues. The weight loss paradigm of this energy balance suggests that if you exercise, you'll create a catabolic situation, and that catabolic situation will cause the oxidation of fuels, and over time you'll lose weight. I think the opposite happens. I think exercise causes anabolism in metabolic pathways. That anabolism causes the production of tissues, and to be able to produce tissues, your body requires the raw materials in terms of energy, proteins, proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, and that's why those people that exercise regularly tend to eat more calories than those people who don't. So the actual premise of this exercising to lose weight makes no sense to me from a biochemical point of view, from a metabolic point of view, and anecdotally and in the research literature, there is really no evidence that those people that exercise more tend to lose weight. What you'll tend to find is that those people that have a healthy lifestyle that includes exercise, they tend to eat healthier, and that's probably why they have lower body weights. They tend not to eat these foods that are metabolic poisons that tend to interfere with metabolic pathways that lead to things like insulin resistance, which are really the drivers of weight gain. So this was quite interesting. High glycemic index carbohydrates after exercise causing a reduction in appetite. The general recommendation, of course, in the mainstream is to eat low glycemic index carbohydrates. It's a bit disingenuous, really, because some low glycemic index carbohydrates are particularly bad. Refined fructose, for example, has a very low glycemic index, and that really is not something that you'd want to eat in high amounts. We look at something like parsnips. Pretty much a healthy food. They're obviously a root vegetable. They have a very high glycemic index, but I wouldn't have suggested that there was any reason why you shouldn't eat parsnips. So that you can always find foods that have a high glycemic index that are actually something that you should incorporate in your diet. There are many foods with a low glycemic index that really should be avoided. So the glycemic index is overused, and I think it's a good research tool. But when you're looking at which foods are healthy and which aren't, it's not really that useful. And it also doesn't correlate too well with the amount of insulin you release from those foods. So fructose produces a very low, if any, production of insulin, or release of insulin, depending on what you eat it with. But it has this effect on metabolic pathways that makes it detrimental. So the insulin index is probably a better way of looking at foods, and whether they are whole or refined is another useful measure. So you can't take these things out of context. High glycemic index, low glycemic index, the indices there is really a tool. It's not something that should be taken as gospel. The recommendation to eat more low glycemic index foods, therefore, it really has to be taken with a pinch of salt. But there's no, I've said this, and this came from Dan Duchesne, which is where I originally heard it. There's no such thing as a bad carbohydrate. There's only a mistimed carbohydrate, and that's absolutely true. Most carbohydrates are beneficial at particular times. There are even times when fructose, in its refined crystalline form, is beneficial. If you've just done some intense or long duration exercise, you've depleted your liver glycogen, fructose in its refined crystalline form can actually be beneficial then. So even some of these, what we call under normal circumstances metabolic poisons, are actually beneficial at certain times. So you have to take carbohydrates as something that is fluid, something that changes all the time. There is a temporal component to it, and therefore you have to think on your feet when you're thinking about what carbohydrates to eat. Think about what exercise you've just done. Think about all these factors that come together to be able to say whether a carbohydrate is going to cause a particular metabolic effect. So I would recommend that you have a look at that study, because it is quite interesting. It's one of those studies that you read, and it makes a lot of sense. It fits in with all of the other things that I've been saying. Just quickly before I end, in England now, the sun's starting to get quite warm. You can go outside today and you can actually feel the sun on your skin. A very good time to start topping up your vitamin D, so that you can start to taper off your vitamin D supplements, and gradually as you go through spring into summer, you won't have a need for those supplements if you can get out into the sun. And I think it's starting to get to the time of year now where you could probably get out in the sun and actually produce vitamin D. So I hope that was interesting. Like I say, I'll put the link to that paper in the comments box below. If you do have any comments on this video or any general questions, please put them in the comments box, and as always I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. I'll see you next week for another video, and in the meantime, take care.